Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Ihsan.
And I'm Erick Mertz.
And this is episode 80 of the
80, big round
podcast.
number.
And it's August 17th, 2022 as we record this. Today, our main topic is crowdfunding. So we're going to dive into that a little bit. We want to thank an existing patron, Valerie Brooks, for upping her pledge. That's super awesome. Thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by our patrons at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan. And for as low as $1 a month, you can get lots of goodies. So go on over there and check out the different tiers. And you have an announcement.
I do. I have a book coming out tomorrow.
Yay! Which I have purchased
Yeah.
already. Even
You
though
did?
I did the pre-order.
Even though it's kind of weird to know who one of the pre-orders are, because it's like they come in and you're like, who was that? Who was that? Who was that?
I
Not
wish
that I
you-
watch. Not that I watch, but I watch definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's what tomorrow will be all about. It's just like kind of watching everything come together. Thank you for buying that. I appreciate it.
I wanted to see how it changed after I gave you my feedback.
Oh, well, oh no, now I'm kind of worried. Do I need to go back and do a quick rewrite? It's too late
No,
now.
it's coming out tomorrow.
Yeah, so that comes out tomorrow, Chasing Shadows, on Amazon. The link will be in the show notes, and actually that's my Linktree notes. Sorry, my Linktree link, so there's a free short story in there. There's a mailing list link in there, so you can get anything that I do through that link.
Cool. I'm gonna have to
But I'm
make one of those
excited.
for me.
Oh, it's actually anybody who doesn't use Linktree should definitely use Linktree, because you never have to change the links on your site or your social media or anything where you would have a link. It's just you update the link on the backside and what you want the link to show, and the link is it's evergreen. So it's
kind of
no
like a
more.
UBL, but for everything else but your book.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's amazing. It's been so I went in and updated everything with that, and now I just sort of shift the Linktree link, and it's been great. So yeah, I'm excited. That book is finally out.
Yay.
And learning all the lessons of pre-orders and things, for the next one, which is not far behind. And yeah,
That's excellent. I'm super excited for you. I can't wait to read it.
Again.
So we do have a comment from it wasn't last episode, it was the Erick Mertz, the sequel, from Mary Van Eberbrook, and she says the discussion was immensely helpful. It was enlightening to hear the ways Erick tackled the issues he mentioned in the previous program and achieved his goals. Bravo. And she's excited to play, develop, and work to implement the ideas discussed in the session. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, wisdom, and experience. So you're welcome. We hope that this is educational and entertaining, and that
and whenever you say Erick Mertz the sequel, I just picture the poster. It's just like the movie poster, and it's
what would be your tagline?
The sequel is always a little better than the original, but it's never quite as good. So I guess now I'm a franchise. I am a franchise.
Do you remember that movie from the 90s? I think it was with Michael Keaton. Duplicity?
He duplicates himself.
Yeah, he clones himself, and every single one is a little bit worse.
Yeah.
That was pretty funny.
I need to clone me today, because today's the day where I have a ton to do, and I need 3 of me. I'm going on a road trip next week, and I need like 3 of me to accomplish the things from now until I leave. So
well, good luck with that.
Yeah,
that's usually my MO.
That's not happening.
Well, my reading went well on the 14th.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
That was fun, well received. And one of the pieces I actually got emotional, started kind of choking up while I was reading, because it was the first one let me back up a little bit. This is a memoir, and Ali is in it, my husband, and he hasn't read it yet. And I want it to be more done, you know, and polished
Right.
before I hand it to him. And he gets veto rights. So anything in there about him that he's uncomfortable with, I will take out, no questions
Hmm.
asked. So this was the first time he had heard me read, or indeed, you know, read himself anything about him in the book. And I did it,
Oh,
you know, in front of his face, in front of a room full of people. Um, you know, he liked it, whatever, but but yeah, I
wow.
guess maybe that was why it was a little more emotional because it was the first time he'd heard it.
Oh yeah, that's a chapter. That's a blog post right there. I mean, I can't even. I'd love to know in depth what that felt like. That's interesting. Never thought of that
But
kind of
but it was cool
relationship.
to get some feedback on pieces of my memoir, you know, because I haven't
Right.
really got that yet because it hasn't gone to the editor or anything. So yeah, that's coming up. I only have like 4 weeks or something before I can finish it enough, you know, get it ready for the line editor. So that's exciting and nerve-wracking. What am I
Absolutely.
reading? I finished reading The Sound of the Snail While Eating book, which was really sweet and lovely, and I recommend it. The writer has some sort of like mysterious um autonomic illness, virus, something, and she can't sit
Mm,
up. Like she just doesn't have enough like blood pressure to sit up. She gets dizzy, and so she has to be horizontal. And they can't figure out what it is, you know. It took them a long, long time to figure out what it was. And and yeah, so the snail is her friend, and you know, she watches it in the terrarium, and that's kind of how she
mm.
stays motivated through her days, you know, because she was a very active person before, and now all of a sudden this thing happened, and so it was really interesting. And if you like, you know, gastropods at all, it was really interesting because there's a little bit of history about that in there too.
Right.
So the book I am now, I just started it. I'm only like 3 or 4 chapters in, so I haven't really like it hasn't grabbed me quite yet because I'm not reading it straight through too. It's been like, oh, I'll read half this chapter today,
Right.
because I just got out of the retreat, which I worked a lot on. And so anyways, the book is The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki.
Hmm.
That's what I'm reading.
Great title.
Yeah, the point of view character is the book, which is reminiscent of The Book Thief, and Death
Yeah.
was the narrator. So the book is the narrator. It's pretty interesting.
Interesting. Yeah.
What are you
Well,
reading?
so the book that if we want to remember, if anyone remembers, I took a book on a little overnight trip and I lost it. I left it at the
Mm-hmm.
Airbnb, and then I went back and I got that book again. So I'm now reading Summer Night by Jim Butcher. It's book 4 in the Dresden Files, which
You went back and got the book?
no, oh,
Oh,
sorry, no. Let me. I'm
wow. That's
pounding
some
on the door,
dedication.
pounding on the door. This is please don't put this in the Airbnb review. I just need my book back. Um, no, I went and I bought it again humbly, and I felt when I went and bought it, I felt like everybody knew that I was the fool that left the book at the Airbnb because it was so present in my mind. It was kind of like my Larry David moment where I just felt like everybody, you know, just way too neurotic about buying that book. But then, so I'm reading it. It's fantastic. It's, you know, if anybody who's read the Dresden Files, I mean, they're just knows they're fantastic fast reads that are great. Um, they just fill your day. You know, I can always find. I have one. I have it on audiobook and I have it on in print, and so I'm kind of just ping ponging between the books, and so it's great. My big dilemma is what book do I take on this road trip next week, and I'm yeah. I keep going. I have 2 books in my hand. I've got Billy Summers' Stephen King book, and I've got Interview with a Vampire, which I've wanted to read. I've never read, and so I'm
What?
kind of
Take that
juggling
one.
them.
Take that one.
Yeah, and then I went and watched a bunch of YouTube reviews of Billy Summers, and Stephen King people love it, and so that means I'll love it. So I don't know.
Well,
We'll
if it
see.
were me, I would bring both
See,
because
here's the
it's
thing.
only going to take up a teeny bit of room. And then if you get there and you're like, oh, this book doesn't really do it for me. If I'd only brought the other one or
But see,
whatever.
I'm the packing critic in my household. Like, I tend to be the one that kind of goes over the luggage and things, and like, do we really need 4 of those? And do we need all of that? And why can't we just do without that? if I pulled out 2 books with that reputation, I would be in a lot of trouble. So I think I have to
Well,
make it
then I mean,
ebooks.
I'm not a huge, yeah, ebooks, or I was going to say audiobooks on a road trip. That's kind of more
Yeah,
of the thing to do is the audiobook because I can't
yeah.
read. Well, even if somebody else is driving, I can't read in the car. It makes me sick.
Oh yeah. No, no, no. I'll do most. Yeah, I'll do most of the driving. I'm just thinking of, you just the 3 hours to kill in the beautiful cabin overlooking the meadow and the prairie and all that. Like, what am I going to have in my hand? I kind of feel like I can't bring Interview with the Vampire because it's just I'm going to be out in Eastern Oregon, so that doesn't feel like Interview with the
I
Vampire
see. It's more of a New
territory.
Orleans thing.
Yeah, like I need to be like in a rainy city in October or something. My next
Okay.
trip.
Your next trip. All right, Billy
Yeah.
Summers it is then.
Yeah. Decisions. All right, let's talk about crowdfunding.
So I just want to preface this by saying I recently heard couple of interviews on different podcasts, which we'll link in the show notes, where the interviewee went really in depth on certain crowdfunding, like Kickstarter, for instance. And so I definitely want you to be able to go and listen to those. Today's conversation, I think, is going to be more like, I want to learn more about crowdfunding, so let's
Right.
talk about it. Um, I don't know if you had any words of that you wanted to start out with
Yeah,
before I
I
start
mean, I
asking my
think
questions.
yeah, I can kind of echo those sentiments because I feel like crowdfunding, as I see it from where I sit, it's evolving in a really, um, interesting way. When I did my Kickstarter, and we'll talk about that. It was pretty new. Kickstarter was probably 2 years old, and it was kind of it was the Wild West. It was just not. It
Untested.
wasn't. Yeah, and now I feel like it's definitely there are some definite rules, and there's just the ways people do things, and it works, and it's become, if you're in the gaming world, it's how games get made. It's
Hmm.
how it's done. You have to kickstart it, um, and so I think that going into the conversation, it's important to understand that like um, it works, it's effective as long as you're following the sort of ways that the ways that it works for what you're doing, right?
Hmm.
So it's very specific. It works different ways for different things. So knowing that going in
So
will be key.
going in, are there specific genres that this works better for, or
Well, from
different
what I'm
projects, I guess?
I mean, from a book perspective, I think that well, the other person we'll link in the show notes too is Russell Nohelty. He's an indie from Southern California. He's been to Willamette Writers. He is a guy who I was just looking to see. He just announced his career earnings on Kickstarter, and I can't find the exact number, but let's say he's really done well, six-figure well in his
Hmm.
career, funding his projects through Kickstarter. Now he does novels and comic books, and I think so. To answer your question, I think that the more the more visual mediums do are better on Kickstarter, right? I mean, I think because a lot of it's a very visual thing. You've got your videos and the page now. Your Kickstarter project page is very graphic and it's very eye catching. So I
Hmm.
think now you might have that with your book, and so, but I think that when you look at things like um, comic books, movies, and games do extremely well on there, and then music does less. And books, I think, are finding their way from what I've read and seen. But the
Hmm.
thing that I've seen people doing on Kickstarter, you can't. What doesn't work on Kickstarter for books is, hey, I'm going to write this book. I haven't written this book. I'm going to write it. Give me money so I can take 6 months off to write. That doesn't work because there's no well, that's like you're asking for benefactors. You're acting. It's like the old days where you're looking for a patron so you can laze around and eat grapes
Although
and write
we
your
will
book.
talk about Patreon, and that's kind of what it models after is having benefactors and people
Right,
that just want to support an artist.
right. I think people do. I think that's what Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general. it's the meeting between I want to support my friend and I want a product. Like it
Mm-hmm.
allows a person to. So what works with writers I've seen is, like, for example, let's just take the book that's coming out for me tomorrow, Chasing Shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you could take that book and say, so right now it's just going to be in ebook form. That's all that's coming out tomorrow. There are
Oh,
multiple other things I could do. There's a print book. Let's say you could do a hardback book. You could do an audio book. All of those are different cost points for a writer. And so what I see a lot of authors doing is they put out the ebook and then they kickstart a print run, or they kickstart the audio book, or they kickstart the something else going in. I guess a podcast version, a professionally produced podcast version of that book. It really that's really what I see a lot of people successful in. And Russell Nohelty, he's got a book out on Amazon about how to use Kickstarter on your book. Um, I think that's what authors are doing right now, and it's working.
I want to put that title in the show notes. Let's see here. Not Nick Nolte.
Nick Nolte, if he'd like to drop by our podcast, that would be fun. Although I think it would just be us listening to him talk in his wonderful voice.
So Russell Nohelty and
Russell Nohelty.
Book. Do you know the title of it yet? I'll just
will find it.
Book on Kickstarter. All right. So I would say, I'm sure there's more, but the three that really come to mind are Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and Patreon.
And then there's Gofundme, but I think Gofundme has evolved into something more. The difference is, and I think those is that you get the money if your project doesn't fund. But I think Kickstarter still runs the model of, I need $10,000. If you get 8,000, you don't get it.
And that seems alarming to me. Like, if you go through all of the work to get support and you find people that are excited and want to support you and they're handing over money, then you just say, well, never mind, and give it back. Like,
well, the way Kickstarter works. So when I did a Kickstarter, I committed all the cardinal sins of what I would say now you would never do. But I had I had a low number. I was producing a short film. This was 9 years ago. And I set the number, I think I asked for like $4,000, and I got $4,000. I got $4,000 because I decided to go camping on the weekend that my project was coming to an end. And my wife got on Facebook and all of her friends and rallied to get me over the finish line, because I just decided to go camping when my project finish line was scheduled. Don't do that. Be around for your project finish line day, because that's a big push. But I just, so in the olden days, you set your tiers. You've got, for $5 you'll get this, for $10 you'll get that. You set different tiers of money that you're asking for, and then people donate at what they want. Now we've evolved into a place where there's stretch goals. If you hit, let's say you have a $10,000 goal, you open up new, like at $5,000, you open up a whole new set of tiers for the people. It's a way to keep people talking about your project, right? If you see successful Kickstarters, it's almost like the way to think of crowdfunding is really more like social media than anything else. You have to keep the audience talking, because people follow your Kickstarter, and you just have to keep a conversation going about that, offering new things, pointing out people. There's an art to it. And again, Russell Nohelty is the guy to I think to look at, to see how to do that with books, because he like right now he has a character called Ichabod Jones, and it's a comic book, and he's reprinting some of the books, and it's just, I see that every day. He's got what's coming out, like the new stretch goals, and he announces everything. Hey, we hit $7,000. And it's fun when you back something, and it's fun to watch the project evolve and things. So it's probably best to mentally think of it like that.
So on Indiegogo, I know that you can keep raising funds after the campaign is over.
Hmm.
Can you do that for Kickstarter too?
No, for Kickstarter, it's you set a 10,000, let's say you set $10,000. You can blow past that. If you look at like successful Kickstarter campaigns, there's people who will set a $10,000 goal and they'll hit 400,000, or they'll hit some really wild number
Like
over their
Brandon
past,
Sanderson, he's all over the
like
news.
Brandon Sanderson. I mean, my most recent backing, I backed a board game that I really wanted, and I think they were asking for like 125,000, and they ended up getting like $3 million.
Whoa.
Yeah, that was the Old Gods of Appalachia, which is a great narrative podcast. But like that, so that's the kind of thing, and I think that's so you wonder, right? So you think out loud, like why, if they knew that they had that kind of clout, why would they set $125,000 if they felt like if they hit, wouldn't it be more realistic to hit a bigger number? But there is also this sort of cred that you get, I think, in that community where, hey, look at how much we blew past our,
Mhm.
our number, and so I think it's effective, but just like everything else we talk about, like it's mentality that I think makes it successful, right? If you went out and asked for, if you've got 100 people on your mailing list and you want to do a print run of your book, you can't ask for $25,000 to do it. So I think you have to be very realistic about what.
Yeah. People want to see
Yeah.
what the money actually goes for. If you're
Yes.
funding something, where's my money going? Why do you need that much money? Because I thought it only cost this much money.
Right.
Yeah, I liked the GoFundMe. I did a GoFundMe for my wedding. Instead of having a registry, we were collecting
Huh?
money for a band. We just wanted to have a live band. We ended up having 2 live bands, but so people would
That's
just
great.
give us money to, pay the band. That was our registry, and people thought that was super fun. And GoFundMe, of course, allows you to keep whatever, you don't have to, you'd set a goal, but I
Right.
don't think we even met the goal, but we still kept all the money. It was just direct deposited into our account. So that was rad. But I think that GoFundMe tends to be less about artistic projects and more about, hey, my neighbor's house burned down, we're
Yeah.
trying to raise money for something, something, or hey,
Yeah.
I know somebody whose, you know, father just died and they need money for medical bills and,
Yeah. Yeah.
funeral
I think
costs and
that's what
stuff
it's
like that.
associated with now.
It
Yeah.
seems like, yeah, it seems like that's that. Um, so that's Kickstarter, Indiegogo. We talked about GoFundMe. So Patreon is another crowdfunding way to go. We have a Patreon page for the podcast. And so that I think is that's a different way of
Yeah.
looking at crowdfunding. Instead of trying to raise a whole bunch of money for a project, it is supporting an artist, musician, writer that puts out regular content. And you're just sort of supporting that, I don't want to say lifestyle, but because, yeah, you're not going to fund someone so they can take 6 months off work to go do whatever. It's
Right.
more
If you want to, please, there's a link I gave in my link tree. It's in there. If you want to fund somebody who's taking 6 months off, you can reach me. I'll take it, and
do
Val will
you
take it too.
do you have like a tip jar on your
Yeah,
link tree? Okay.
go right on it. Well, you can just go find my email and just, I'll give you all the digits on how to deposit the money for
Yeah.
6 months. I have extravagant tastes and an outsized lifestyle, but 6 months isn't much. Anyway,
So
go
the
ahead.
cool thing about Patreon is, there are the bunch of different tiers. You set those up, and you have benefits per each tier, but the tiers can be anywhere from $1, $2 a month, all the way up to, you can write those stretch goals in too if you want. And we do have some of those. And like I know Joanna Penn's podcast, she said, once I get to so many patrons, then I'll do um, a bonus audio show of like a Q&A. And so she's been doing that for years now. And
Right.
I remember she was kind of like, it was at the point where she was thinking, should I keep doing the podcast? I feel like I've said everything I'm going to say. Do people really listen to this? I don't know. Well, let me just try this Patreon thing. And I remember when she put it out, she said, if you feel like this podcast is worth anything to you, then please consider, joining Patreon. And yeah, that was a great way to look at it, because I felt like I got so much information and
Yeah.
education out of that podcast. I was like, yeah, I totally think it's like worth this much money every
Oh
month.
yeah. Yeah.
And so I've been a patron since she opened her page. But other
And for how
people,
much, right? I mean, how much money do you give?
I still do give her $10 a month,
Yeah.
which
I think
is
my
the
page.
highest paid
Oh, really?
Patreon for me. Like mostly
Oh, okay.
because if I want, so two things. I want to support my artist friends, my
Right.
writer friends. And so that's a way to do it. And also there's some social proof there too. Like if I'm asking people to be my patron, then
Yes.
duh, like this is how I'm supporting the arts too. But most of the
And
people
it's
that
something. Well, right. I don't want to miss that point. It's literary citizenship, like it's artistic
absolutely.
citizenship. So and I think that works for Joanna Penns of the world who who want that capital, who are trying to raise money to build their business. But it
Hmm.
also works for me when I give money to something. I
Hmm.
support, I don't know, I think $30 a month worth of stuff on Patreon. Like it makes me feel good. Like I get my short story from that person. I get my book every 6 months from that person. It feels good. it
Hmm.
it the street cred is there, but like it's social proof. I think that's a better term actually, but it feels good. It just
Yep.
does.
And they're not just artists and writers, but I also support local dog rescues
Oh,
on
that's cool.
Patreon.
That's
So that
Yeah.
makes me feel really good.
I get all of my
Definitely.
weird homebrewed D&D content from for $5 a month, and it's great. It's awesome.
So
I think.
the deal with Patreon, I just want to be clear. So
Yeah.
you what is cool about Patreon is you can have a bunch of people that are just donating $1 a month. And that becomes, a source of income. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you've got, 100 patrons that are giving at $1 a month,
Right.
then you're earning $100 a month. That's awesome. And the other cool thing is, some people like are embarrassed at just doing the $1 tier. They feel like, oh, I should do the $10 tier or the $15 tier or whatever. But no, because if you're trying to reevaluate your like it's about time for me to go through my subscription services and be like, all right, do I really need the subscription to this? Do I really need this? It's about time
Yeah.
for me to do that again. And I do it periodically. So if you're giving somebody, $10 or $15 a month through Patreon, you might be like, should I, but if you're only giving $1, it's like, oh, well, it's just $1. So those
That's a
patrons stick
great point.
around a lot
Yeah.
longer than the ones that donate more. Just pragmatically, makes sense too, and then one other thing I didn't bring up before, but Ko-fi, that's how I've always pronounced it. I don't know if it's actually pronounced something different, but it's ko-fi.com. And it's kind of like Patreon, except it's not monthly.
Hmm.
So you can just buy them a cup of coffee. That's how it, so you can set whatever price that is. So if you want to do like a one-time donation, like you would, maybe for Kickstarter or something like
Right.
that, you want to do a one-time donation, you can do that through ko-fi.com if the artist, has a page there. So those are a bunch of different options for the patron, for the donator.
Right.
And I like that, so that they can have options. So I think it's cool, to have a project on Kickstarter, for instance, but also to have some way of doing it like monthly too, or something like if you give the people
Well,
options, then they feel better.
Well, I think you hit on so many good points, and I don't know how I'm going to respond to all of them, or at least add to all of them. But there's multiple. So I was speaking with an author. I'm doing some mailing list swaps in the next month, and so I make it a point to communicate with those authors. And I noticed that one of the guys I was swapping with had a Patreon account, and he had 150 subscribers, and I think it looked like it was $250 a month. And for those tiers, he was basically giving a bonus short story in his world. And there was a couple of other things. I forget what it is. Oh, like one of the tiers was he'd name a character after you. There was kind of fun fan service stuff and material. And I think that when I was talking with him about it, he said, look, I write these short stories. What else am I gonna, I could go put them out to magazines. I could do that. And he does for other things, but he's getting $250 for a short story a month. Now, again, it's not all about capital, but if you're writing short stories and you don't know what to do with them, that's a great way to get a good market rate for your short story. And it's something you're giving your fans something they want, right? I mean, I think all that extra stuff, I mean, as a fan, I live for that kind of thing. I want I want the Easter eggs. I watch the 5-minute thing on YouTube. And I think if instead of thinking of it like begging for money, like I think it's the best kind of fan service you can do as a creator. You're giving people what they want and you're getting paid for it. Patreon is if you looked at my list of things to do in 2023, it's to find a way to create, a funding stream through Patreon that allows me to get some of this content off my desk into people. So for a cup of coffee or
For
$1.
a cup of coffee, yeah. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. I'd love to be somebody's line item on there. It would be great. But I think the key is like, we kind of hinted at it a few times, but you have to give something. People don't want to just fund your noodling time. They want a product, and it can be a raw product, or it can be a short product. It can be whatever it is, but you have to give something. There's no money for nothing.
Yes.
But if you know where there is, click the link below with my link tree. Just kidding. Made that joke twice. I'm not making it again.
That's a nice bookend. So I guess that's time for we can end the the conversation now.
I think this is one to come back to, because I think, as you and I being entrepreneurial, I think, as our Patreon for this podcast evolves, as I dip my toes in it, I think we come back and keep talking about it and find ways to, evolve the conversation. And I think it's just important to know that as we evolve, I think this is an evolving place for artists. So I think that wherever you hit it, it's fine if you don't know everything, or if you haven't done it yet. It's evolving, and you can learn to see where it's going. You don't have to worry about where it's been. I think there's that fear of missing out thing. It's like, well, I haven't been there yet. So
why
if you haven't been there yet,
yeah.
Fine. It's going places. Just be on the train when it gets there.
Yeah. And research the different types and see which one makes more sense, or yeah, just you could do a podcast search, or maybe even YouTube, but like listen to other authors that have been successful with their Kickstarter or different fundraising. Read Russell Nolte's book and
Right.
just collect data, learn about the different options, and then choose one. And the other thing, I think it was Monica Leonelle, I heard her talking about it, something about like, you don't have to you can practice, you can do a really small Kickstarter at first and just try it out, like try to raise $1,000 for a project or something like that. Like,
Right.
just do something small, kind of get your feet wet, figure out how it all works. And then, maybe the following year, like prep for this big one. And yeah, it's not a thing that you can just put up in an afternoon and be like, all right, let's see, what can I give away? It's
Right.
going to take some
It's planned.
preparation,
It's planned.
and you want to delight the people that are giving you money. So it's not just sort of a one-off thing. You do need to be around on launch day.
Be around on launch day. Yeah. I'll never forget that. Like calling her, like getting out of the campground and calling her from a payphone. That's how long ago that was, and saying, "Did we hit it?" She goes, "I think so." And then I got home and saw like how much work she did. So couldn't have been any happier. The other thing to do is like I completely agree with you when you say like do your research and figure out what works for other people. But also, if you have an idea for an incentive or a method on how to make it work, and you're not seeing other people doing it, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try it. As
Mhm.
long as you're within the spirit of the whichever platform you're using, it's this is like there's so much room for innovation. There's it's so much room.
Totally.
If you have something that nobody else is doing, which if you do, like I would say use it because that might, you might just be the person people are talking about.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm excited. I want to try like all of these things. I am our ConvertKit is the email service that I use, and they have a tip jar. So I need to figure out how to put that up places, So if you
Yeah.
just put stuff, if you just have it around, I put our Patreon link in my email signature. So it's
Right.
just around, I don't think anyone's ever clicked on that, but maybe someday
Right.
just
But as
have
you're
it
building these
available.
things, yeah.
Yeah.
And use
And
Linktree because you could have it in your Linktree, and as long as that's your permanent link that
mhm,
links on all of your things,
there
it's
you
like
go.
kind of passive. It's kind of like it's just a passive way to gather support for things. So
Yeah,
you don't have to
for
like
sure.
actively like seek.
Yeah.
So
So I think doing a combination is probably a good way to do it.
yeah,
All right.
this was fun.
It was fun. It's got me thinking like what kind of projects I could do. Like after this book is published, I think I might start thinking about like what's the next project? Is it something that somebody else would want to contribute to?
Right.
How could I make that exciting? Start
Yeah.
researching. Yeah. And I love learning. So that'll be fun. The research part
Yeah.
will be fun for me, and I'll start getting all these ideas.
Very
All
cool.
right. Well, happy writing, and we'll see you
Absolutely.
next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.